was rather late at night and I was returning home from a party. As exhausted as I was, I somehow stumbled to my car, navigating my way through a dark route. Once there, I popped my phone into the charger and set the map for home. I would say it was around 1 or 2 a.m. this time, and I was ready to pass out. But I trekked on through the night, listening as Siri had told me. I got onto the highway that normally takes me home and prepared myself for the half-hour voyage. It was odd. As I merged onto the expressway, there was an absence of cars, and this wasn't some abeyance of traffic either. After driving for 15 minutes, I didn't witness any other vehicle. I guess this could have just been some coincidence and kept on following the route home. Thoughts from the hectic night began racing through my head, and admittedly I wasn't entirely sober enough to be behind the wheel. Regardless, I was aware of what was happening enough to recapture the night. I was catching up with old college friends, and we spent our time reliving the events we relished so much together at our university. It was refreshing. It's like being a student all over again. Unfortunately, my tangent of anecdotes was interjected by that robotic voice emanating from my phone. In 1 mile, take exit 21 to merge onto Murphy Boulevard. As always, I'm a bit annoyed by Siri's constant reminders, but I knew it was for the best as she was actually my only guide home. After taking the exit, I began scanning the radio for songs. Particularly, I was looking for the best of the 90s to extenuate the get-together with my buds. I wasn't getting too many stations on the receiver and continued to just fiddle around with it. Some hazy, fuzzy clamor seemed to almost spill from the speakers. It wasn't a standard sound produced by a non-existent channel, but rather it was a sound of these rustling leaves and, I guess I would say, the frequent break of a twig. Trying to eliminate the irritating cacophony, I continued to tweak that dial, though. I tweaked it so much that it actually popped off and fell onto the passenger side of the car. So I reached over to grab it, and once again I was interrupted by turn left onto Simon Road. Out of instinct, I slammed my foot on the brake. With the position I was in, my body rocketed forward as the car came to a halt. In the process, my head jeered onto the glove box, and I was left with a severe migraine. God damn it. My eyes darted left and right. They examined each mirror, but again, no one was on the road. In my 20 or so minutes on that road, I had witnessed one other person now. This was actually pretty weird. Despite the oddity, though, I left my hands and put them back on the wheel and pressed on the accelerator. Just a couple more minutes, I thought. I made a sharp turn left and headed down the road back home. Once driving down this road at a slower speed, I felt more comfortable. It would have only been a few miles till I was home, really, and my headache was beginning to actually subside. Siri began to dictate once again, but my focus refused to even acknowledge her as this lifeless blob on the side of the road distracted me. As my car rolled closer to it, I noticed the object attempting to inch its way off of the street, yet in some sort of struggle I couldn't discern much of what was happening, so I turned on my brights. I felt as though a new realm previously invisible had just been completely revealed. With clear vision, this puzzling creature became fully visible. I first noticed a trail of dark, almost colorless blood smeared across the street. The streak originated from a location beyond my area of visibility, however it had this distinct endpoint. The painter of this river of red was a dog, or maybe I should say half a dog for that matter. The poor pup was dragging what remained of its torso along the pavement, stretching out its 2 front paws and desperately grasping for new ground with each reach. Its exposed ribs barely managed to retain its intestines, which were strung out several feet behind the animal, yet still attached. And being carried along in its battle for life, hushed whimpers escaped that dog's vocals as it continued to meander across the landscape. Initially, I sat in my stopped car thinking this was the most grotesque roadkill I'd ever even come across in my life. However, at a second glance, I noticed the tracks it had created with its own remains and outpouring of plasma. I also analyzed the creature and could see these deep scratches that exposed its fat, and clearly torn muscles that appeared ripped rather than mushed. There was no result of a tire. This couldn't have been. The dog met its fate from some kind of a predator, and something else was out there in those woods that had devoured its prey. As the dog nearly found its footing on the other end of the asphalt, a ringing began blaring from my radio. I figured I must have left it on full volume at some blank station. As much pity I'd have felt for the dog, it was late and I actually had to get home. About a minute after leaving the gruesome scene, Siri was imminent on giving directions. She stated over and over again for miles, "Make a U-turn," and I kept on ignoring her. As usual, Apple Maps was giving me completely false directions. I won't be able to disregard her for long, though. The roads I was sure I was familiar with seemed to have transformed into completely unrecognizable routes. I made turn after turn on my own for around half an hour before even glancing at my phone. The area I was in was fairly rural and lowly populated. Most of the streets I took led to dead ends or farms. Confused out of my mind, I picked up my phone. By this time, I was completely irate. It was extremely late, and my phone failed to bring me back home. I checked my location, I zoomed out, and this moment, I became fully confused. I had to rub my eyes out. There was no way any of this was possible. The digital map had shown my location on a road name that was no more than 5 minutes from my house. When I expanded my view, I noticed that there was a separate road with the exact same name. In fact, Murphy Boulevard and Simon Road were completely duplicated too. The streets were about half of an hour away from each other, but were exactly the same. They didn't just have the same name, they made the same turns, had the same intersections, even the coloring of the pavement looked copied. This just didn't make any sense to me. Something was clearly wrong with the application. My mind was flourishing with questions and I fell victim to my curiosity. I honed in on my location and flicked the screen up. I cautiously swiped on the road to ensure I didn't miss a thing. Stopping at the intersection, I moved my finger across to motion left. I made a few more taps up on the device and ceased my navigation. I could feel each breath becoming more difficult to take as I gazed down on my phone. Every part of me trembled and my heart began to race. I was sweating, layers between the palm of my hands and my phone. What I was looking at was not just some duplicate street or road, it was a satellite picture of my own home, located several miles away in a totally different town. I had to go see it. It was late, I was on the verge of passing out, but I had to check it out. So with little trust in Siri and her directions, I cut off my ties to technology, I trusted my memory, and I headed home. I barred down the dirt road I was accustomed to, turned to my neighborhood, and ventured down the eerily familiar road to my house. My foot wasn't even on the accelerator. I didn't even have the courage to blatantly arrive at this destination. I simply left my car rolling forward at no more than 5 miles an hour. The velocity to which my mind was racing juxtaposed a sluggish stroll. As more and more thoughts came into my mind, this tingling sensation pulsed through my body. The massive accretion of fear had become almost impossible to subside. When I finally arrived in front of the house, it was as if all my certainties that the iPhone was just broken had been shattered. It wasn't a virtual image. What it was a reality. Less than 100 feet from me stood the exact house I'd been living in for years. There wasn't a single noticeable difference in the frame. I creaked open my door and softly shut it to avoid alarming anyone. I tiptoed up the driveway and of course saw the same model car as mine. Although I must say this vehicle displayed little signs of wear and tear, it actually looked brand new, covered in this shiny blue lacquer. My inspection of the car was cut short when the neighbor's dog began to bark at me. It almost fled inside to silence the alerting dog, but was unable to when my mind made a connection. I only had a quick glance in the dark, but I was almost sure of something when I saw the dog. The dog hobbled over to me as its barks abated. The creature only had 3 legs, but made the best of its mobility. The disturbing aspect of this wasn't the lack of any limb. Peering into the eyes of the dog, it was clear that the dog was no different from the one I had seen on the side of the road. Other than the fact that it had 3 legs and not, 2. What the fuck is going on, I thought. Someone must have found this dog, stitched him back up. I refuted the claim quickly, as there was no way the canine could have even been repaired. That was a pretty fucked up injury. There must have been something out there in the woods hunting these animals. The entity that took the first dog's life must have stolen this one's leg. Footsteps echoed in the distance, though. I crouched behind the automobile to abscond the rays of light illuminating my position. The tiny pup turned its attention to the approaching footsteps. I heard the sounds of soles hitting concrete emanate and grow louder. Accompanying it was a noise of dripping and the rummaging and shifting of what sounded like a tarp, possibly. Fortunately, as soon as I discovered these were originating from the neighbor walking up his driveway, they were no longer rising in intensity. The pup starts barking in accordance with his greeting. He dashed towards the owner. The voice that said, "Good boy, yes you are," was no different than that of my new neighbor back at home. I had to get a visual on the event. Moving hastily, I darted my head up above the frame of the car and peeked over the hood. Surely enough, I saw my neighbor patting his 3-legged pet on his head. But his other arm was wrapped around a large blue tarp that was blotched with blood and spilling it left and right. The man was distracted by his dog and unraveled the mess he was failing to hold together with one arm. Out of the bundle fell 2 legs attached by the remaining waist of a dog. I was sure this was actually the lower half of the animal I had seen suffering earlier. Ugh. I felt sick to my stomach and felt restrained from moving. I heard the man speak to his dog again. "Look what I got for you, buddy, brand new." He couldn't possibly be referring to the legs, could he? My curiosity now no longer outweighed my terror. I was unwilling to wait any longer. I pushed myself back off the car and began sprinting the 100 feet or so separating me from the beacon of safety my car actually seemed to be. Before reaching a full-on dash, an unsettling tone beckoned out at me. "Hey, what are you doing here? Siri should have brought you to the harvest zone a while ago." And that voice was actually my own. I overcame the obstacle of fear and motioned my head back as swiftly as I could. The front door to the house was now open, and I saw, surely, what would resemble me, but was far from exact. I looked and saw this disfigured being whose limbs were twisted and disjointed. His skin paralleled the features of leather with its tough and darkly colored appeal, but his face was the most abject of all. An eye socket remained on the better side where the other's was a mess of flesh and bone. Scarring smothered his cheeks, his gaping mouth displayed few and jagged teeth protruding through his discolored, mushy excuse for gums, and his nose dissipated after an inch, leaving 2 rugged holes in the center of his face. Ugh. The hairless, wretched version of me attempted to trek his way towards me with his ruined excuse for legs, by the way. I had no interest in finding out what would happen if he were even to reach me. I returned to my car with haste and I took off. I fired up the maps in hope of finding a way home at this point. With the app opened up, I found myself scrolling through a warped map. At the one end of the road starts, the same one would reappear. I decided I can't trust the damn thing at all. I would just try and head home on my own. I took the roads I knew, roads I didn't. I made hundreds of turns and tried just about every route. But I couldn't escape. No matter where I went, I kept on ending up on the same street. Out of options, I had to go to Apple Maps. I wasn't allowed to enter an address for whatever reason. I tried everything, tweaked every option, but it was set on preventing me from altering its course. A preset location was on it, and I went ahead and followed the directions. Driving my worn car at a slow speed, I listened to each motion. Turn left. I grabbed hold of the wheel and shifted the car left. I wasn't really aware of what I was going, where I was, but I just remained driving. Continue for 1 mile, then turn right. I did as she asked, and I was gradually starting to recognize the area. Just as I hit the next corner and prepared to turn, my memory flooded back to me. The distinct sound of rustling leaves once again resonated through my car. Siri speaks out. "Drive a half a mile, and the destination is on your left." I heard some muffled voice under the clamor of leaves and twigs. I turned the radio up to get some better sound. "Is this him?" a deep voice asked. The only response I heard was another man attempting to silence the dialogue. Siri reiterated, "The destination is on your left, in 400 feet. The pace I drove at slowed. The extinguishable muffles over the radio subsided, and as I drifted closer and closer, a high-pitched ringing grew louder. I now realized this wasn't the result of a blank station. Rather, it was the sound of a receiver approaching the source. "The destination is on your left," Siri notes. To my left, 2 men informally clothed in suits emerged from a thickly wooded area. The larger of 2 carried a blade that was a couple feet in length. The other held a radio system with him and an antenna that looked like some sort of hacking device. Time wasn't on my side, as I seemed to inch closer at a rapid rate despite their slow pace. I pushed my foot on the accelerator, and I wasn't prepared for what would unravel. The car was motionless. However, I checked the fuel and it read empty. Locking my doors and rolling up the windows, I could only sit and watch. Now only 20 feet or so from my car, the men had grinned. One of them was tucking open a garbage bag as the other lifted his machete from his shoulder in preparation. With my car door now being the only barrier between them and me, I could hear some faint voice. "Arrived at destination." So first of all, ladies and gentlemen, let me allow to state that this might actually be the first spooky story we've covered where we actually just have it centered around a map tool for all things. Now, for those of you who happen to drive or transit very frequently or go around place to place, I'm sure Google Maps, I'm sure Apple Maps, I'm sure many map tools are our bread and butter for getting around. I know I use it a lot when I travel. I know I even use it a lot when I'm going around Toronto in general, too, just because, sometimes people will give you an address and you gotta find the exact way to get to it, and frankly, your map tool is more helpful than anything else that you could ever get your hands on. It's why I think GPSs are kind of outdated. I think some people end up using their phones more than they ever would use any other kind of a device, right? More people would end up just using their own phone rather than the built-in GPSs on cars or anything else. It's very useful, and frankly, I think it's something a lot of people can relate to. Now, it's kind of weird how our protagonist needs a GPS to get back home from a party. I think if I go to a party, especially to friends, my old buddies, I think I know where their house is, and I think I know the general route back to my own home from it. But you know what? To each their own. Maybe somebody's really horrible with directions, and actually some people are. They can never really find their own way back, even after they've been to a place numerous times. It's kind of shocking to me, but you know what? Everyone's different, right? Now, I haven't been the biggest user of Apple Maps personally. I recently had picked up an iPhone after only exclusively really using Android devices, and I still love Google Maps way more than I've ever loved Apple Maps in my brief time that I've tried to use it. I think the one time I did use the Apple Maps tool, and it gave me a 15-minute extra time to get home once from the city, which was really weird. I don't know how it really calculates area. I don't know if it even calculates things like traffic and whatnot too. Regardless though, Apple Maps, for those of you who don't know, is iOS's version of their map tool, which previously they used to use Google for a lot of things, but after the whole after they basically fell out, they created their own things to counteract Google's domination on their device anyways. But that is a whole different story, and this is frankly a creepypasta right here, and we're focusing on just what this tool and what its usage is in the story. Now, as far as we know, the two people at the end who I can only believe to have dismembered that poor lad, I don't know how the story would be written. Maybe it was dictated and uploaded or something like that. I'll go with that. I'll go with that sense of disbelief. But I don't think Apple Maps can really be hacked by some cellular hacking device. It completely uses different protocols anyways, and I'm sure there's a layer of encryption beyond it that allows you to keep your location safe from anybody that wants to intrude on your phone. And that's sort of the weird thing about these creepypastas too, and it's personally for me too. Some people, they might end up believing that this is a reality, but the thing is, I feel me knowing a little bit more about this stuff, me being, you know, the person that, you know, has read up on this stuff, this is the kind of stuff that, you know, I dabbled myself in. It's kind of hard for me to put that level of disbelief because you can't simply hack somebody's map tool and give them some weird direction or inject a fake map or something like that. But the whole concept of it is rather interesting. There's people out there that frankly are harvesting people, sacrificing, cannibals, whatever it could be. It wasn't exactly explained. It left us to guess for our own, and frankly it could be anything. I'm gonna go with some weird satanic cannibalist kind of people, you know, so some of those eccentric types. And alongside that, you know, people are hacking somebody's maps out in the middle of the night so that they can drive to some weird part of the woods where they're sacrificing animals and whatnot, crazy shit, then that is actually kind of scary. Now, while it couldn't really happen, if it could, say, you know, it would be one of those things that I'd actually see happening in the world today. You know, there's a lot of sick stuff that happens. There really is, trust me. But the thing is like, this kind of stuff, you know, it's so far-fetched and out there, but at this point, you know, it's almost something you can't really disbelieve, right? Like, I mean, if you go to some, like, small, closed-off town or something like that, or some, like, you know, ghost town that you never would have thought might have existed, hey, maybe there are people that are crazy and psycho enough to be pulling this kind of stuff off, using the same technology we use to make our lives better, ultimately make our lives completely hellish in a matter of a few minutes. Now, whether or not Apple Maps can be hacked like this, it's not really up for debate. It frankly couldn't, you know, just because of the complexity of the applications themselves now. And frankly, it's not like some Hollywood type hacking where you can just inject these kind of weird maps. But the whole story, I gotta say, aside from a lot of the, I would say, pretentious words that were being used, some of them I actually omitted from the story just because they really weren't jiving with me all that well. It's honestly interesting. You sort of sit there wondering what's exactly going to happen next to this individual, and when you get to the end, I feel genuinely bad. You know, this person, all they were doing is trying to get home from a party. They decided to use their map tool, and without even them doing anything bad or getting some spooky, demonic, satanic stuff, Siri ended up leading them to just a really, really dark situation. Now, I could only hope the person got out of it just because of the fact that this was a story that was posted, you know, that little bit of disbelief, but car breaks down, you run out of gas, and you got two people ready to dismember the ever-loving hell out of you. Not a good situation to be in, but I'll ask you, what would you think about it? What would you rate the story, and what would you change to make it better? And frankly, what do you think about these Apple Maps or Google Maps or whatever? You know, do you ever think next time you fire up your GPS coming home from a party, you think it might take you exactly where you want to go, or frankly, somewhere far more sinister? Let me know what you think. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. This is me, Mudahar, and this has been another episode of Creepypastas, part of Haunted Gaming, that whole series. I am out.